The first time my daughter said the word declining, it didn't scare me. It confused me. I was 68 years old, widowed less than 3 months, and so tired I could barely finish a cup of coffee without setting it down halfway through. Grief does that to you. It drains energy in a way sleep can't fix. But confusion? I wasn't confused. I knew exactly where I was. I knew the date. I knew the ache in my chest had a name. My husband, Frank, was gone. 42 years of marriage ended quietly in a hospital room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee that had been reheated too many times. After the funeral, the house felt too big and too small at the same time. I slept oddly, ate irregularly. Some days, I stayed in bed longer than usual because getting up meant acknowledging he wouldn't be in the kitchen. That's when my children started watching me. At first, it felt like concern, calls to check in, offers to run errands. Then the questions began. Did you eat today? Did you remember your appointment? Mom, you already told me that. I hadn't, but I let it go. I didn't want to argue. I didn't want to seem defensive. I thought patience would reassure them. It did the opposite. 3 weeks later, my son Tom suggested I shouldn't be alone so much. My daughter Elaine nodded silently beside him, lips pressed together like she'd already made up her mind. They talked around me, not to me, used phrases like for now and just until things stabilize. I remember sitting there, hands folded in my lap, thinking how strange it was that grief had turned me invisible. The move happened quickly after that. One afternoon, Elaine arrived with paperwork and a car already packed. Assisted living. Temporary, they said. Safer, easier. I protested. I cried. I said I wasn't ready. Elaine hugged me and said, "Mom, this is what's best." That's when I realized something was very wrong, because no one had asked me what I wanted. And that was only the beginning. The papers weren't explained to me. They were presented. Elaine laid them out on my dining table like she was setting down menus at a restaurant. Efficient, rehearsed, already impatient. Tom stood behind her, arms crossed, eyes flicking between me and his phone. Neither of them asked if I wanted tea. Neither of them asked how I was feeling. That was the first clear sign. This wasn't about care. It was about control. "Mom, just sign these," Elaine said. "This part is medical. This part is financial. It's all standard." Standard. As if the life I'd built for nearly 7 decades could be reduced to a checklist. I picked up the first page and scanned it slowly. Power of attorney, durable, immediate. I wasn't a lawyer, but I'd worked as a school secretary long enough to recognize when language was designed to strip authority quietly. My name appeared at the top. My children's names appeared everywhere else. "I don't understand why this is necessary," I said. Elaine exhaled sharply. "Because you're not thinking clearly, Mom, and we can't keep doing this." "Doing what?" I asked. "Managing your moods," Tom cut in. "You're up one day, down the next. You forget things. You repeat yourself. You left the stove on last week." I stared at him. I boiled water for tea and sat down because I was crying. The kettle didn't boil dry. Nothing burned. "That's not the point," Elaine snapped. "The point is you're not safe." There it was. The word that changes everything. Unsafe. Once someone says that, your preferences stop mattering. Your history stops mattering. Your competence becomes something others debate. "I'm grieving," I said quietly. "My husband died." "And people die every day," Elaine replied, her voice tight. "Most of them don't fall apart like this." The cruelty of that sentence landed with precision. Not loud, not dramatic, just sharp enough to cut. I felt my chest tighten, not with sadness this time, but with something closer to anger. I'd raised this woman. I'd sat up nights with her when she was sick, driven her to college interviews, bailed her out when she made mistakes she didn't want to explain to her friends. Now she was looking at me like I was an inconvenience she needed to manage. "I'm not signing anything today," I said, pushing the papers back toward her. Elaine's jaw clenched. "Mom, don't do this." "Do what?" "Make it harder than it already is." Tom scoffed. "You don't even understand how bad this looks. Neighbors have called me asking if you're okay. You don't answer your phone half the time." "I don't answer because I'm tired," I said, "and because sometimes I don't want to talk." "That's not normal," Elaine said flatly. Something shifted in me then, a small, quiet realization. Normal, in their eyes, meant convenient. Grief that moved too slowly was unacceptable. Sadness that interfered with their schedules was a problem to be solved, not a process to be respected. 2 days later, they came back with a different approach. The assisted living facility was already chosen, deposit paid, room assigned. Elaine spoke on the phone to the administrator while standing in my living room, describing me in the third person like I wasn't there. "Yes, she's still ambulatory. No diagnosis yet, but she's declining. We just want her somewhere safe." Declining again. I told them no. I said it clearly. I said it repeatedly. It didn't matter. Tom loaded boxes into his truck, while Elaine packed my clothes with brisk efficiency, commenting on how much junk I'd accumulated. She held up my wedding photo at one point and frowned. "Do you really need this?" she asked. I took it from her and held it to my chest. "Yes." She rolled her eyes. "Fine, but you can't clutter up the new place." The new place, as if it were a promotion. The drive there felt unreal. I watched my neighborhood pass by through the car window, noticing details I'd never paid attention to before. The cracked sidewalk near Mrs. Henderson's house. The oak tree Frank used to complain dropped too many leaves. I wondered if I was seeing it for the last time. No one told me otherwise. At the facility, Elaine signed more papers. Tom spoke to a financial coordinator about liquidating assets. I caught fragments of conversation that made my stomach drop. House valuation, storage unit, selling furniture, my furniture. "You don't have the authority to do that," I said, my voice shaking. Elaine didn't even look at me. "We do now." That's when the fear arrived. Not the vague sadness I'd been living with, but something cold and immediate. I was being erased in real time, and everyone around me was acting like it was reasonable. The room they put me in was small but clean, neutral, designed to hold people waiting. Waiting for meals, waiting for visits, waiting for the end of something. Elaine kissed my cheek stiffly before leaving. "This is for the best," she said. "You'll thank us later." I didn't cry when they left. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded, listening to the muffled sounds of other residents down the hall. Televisions, coughs, a woman calling out a name that never came. That night, I didn't sleep. The next morning, a young nurse's aide came in to help me with breakfast. She introduced herself as Maya, spoke directly to me, asked what I wanted instead of assuming. When she noticed I was reading a paperback novel, she smiled. "I loved that one," she said. "The ending wrecked me." I looked up at her, surprised. No one had spoken to me like a person in days. Later, When she helped me walk the hallway, she asked casually, "How long have you been here?" "Since yesterday," I said. Her steps slowed. "Oh, what?" She hesitated, then said quietly, "They usually don't bring people like you here unless there's something else." "What kind of something else?" She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. That afternoon, I asked to see my financial statements. The administrator told me my daughter handled those. I asked to call my lawyer. Elaine had already closed that account, saying I no longer needed it. Each request met a wall built of politeness and procedure. That's when I understood the full scope of what my children had done. They hadn't just moved me. They'd boxed me in. And the more I pushed back, the clearer it became. This was never about my health. It was about my house. Once the thought settled in my mind that this wasn't about my safety, everything else began to unravel at a frightening speed. It was as if a curtain had been pulled back, revealing not chaos, but calculation. And calculation hurts more than confusion ever could. The first few days in that place passed slowly, measured in meal trays and medication carts rolling down the hallway. I ate because I was expected to eat. I slept because the lights went out at a certain hour. I smiled when spoken to, nodded when instructions were given. On the surface, I looked compliant. Inside, I was coming apart. Grief had already softened me. It had stripped away the routines that once anchored my days. Losing Frank had left me raw, exposed, searching for something solid to lean against. My children had seen that softness and mistaken it for weakness. Or worse, they'd recognized it as opportunity. At night, when the facility quieted down and the televisions clicked off one by one, my thoughts grew louder. I replayed conversations from the weeks after Frank's funeral, moments I dismissed at the time because I was too tired to examine them closely. Elaine asking casually how much the house was worth these days. Tom mentioning his credit cards were a mess and joking that at least I had equity. I'd laughed weakly then, assuming they were trying to lighten the mood. Now the laughter felt foolish. The emotional unraveling wasn't dramatic. I didn't scream or cry uncontrollably. I withdrew inward, peeling back layers of memory and motive with the same methodical attention I used to apply to school records back when that was my job. Patterns emerged, not accidents, patterns. The staff treated me kindly enough, but kindness in an institution has limits. It's scheduled, regulated. Maya, the young aide, was the exception. She lingered when she didn't have to. She asked questions that weren't on any checklist. She noticed that I read for hours without losing focus, that I corrected her gently when she misremembered a detail I'd shared the day before. One evening, as she helped me back to my room after dinner, she said quietly, "You don't seem confused." The words hit me harder than any insult my children had thrown at me. "No," I said, "I'm not." She nodded slowly, as if confirming something she'd already suspected. "Then why are you here?" That question unraveled something inside me completely. Because I didn't have a simple answer. Because saying, "My children put me here," felt like admitting to a betrayal I wasn't ready to face fully. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped so tightly my knuckles ached. "They said I was declining," I said finally. Maya frowned. "Declining how?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. There was no answer that didn't sound absurd when spoken aloud. I wasn't wandering. I wasn't forgetting names. I wasn't unsafe. I was sad, exhausted, human. She didn't push. but her silence felt different from everyone else's. It wasn't dismissive. It was attentive. That night, I cried for the first time since arriving. Quiet tears, careful not to make noise, soaking into the thin pillowcase. I cried for Frank, for the life we'd built, and for the realization that the people I trusted most had decided I was expendable once I became inconvenient. The next day, I asked the facility's social worker for a meeting. I explained calmly that I didn't believe I belonged there, that I hadn't consented to the move, that I wanted access to my finances. She listened with a sympathetic tilt of her head and said words that would replay in my mind for weeks. Your children are acting in your best interest. Best interest. Another phrase that erases the person it claims to protect. I asked what evidence they had of my incapacity. She referred vaguely to family reports and recent changes. I asked for specifics. She suggested I rest and revisit the conversation later. The meeting ended with nothing resolved, except my understanding that the system was built to believe my children by default. That afternoon, Elaine called. She spoke briskly, like someone checking off a task. She told me the house was being appraised, that some of my furniture had already been sold because storage costs add up. She said it was better I didn't worry about those details anymore. I didn't give permission, I said, my voice trembling despite my efforts. Elaine sighed. Mom, you're not in a position to make these decisions right now. According to whom? According to reality, she snapped. Look at where you are. The implication was clear. The very fact that I was in a nursing home was now being used as proof that I belonged there. Circular logic, airtight and cruel. After the call ended, I sat very still, staring at the beige wall across from my bed. I felt something inside me break, not in a dramatic way, but like a thread snapping under constant tension. The grief that had once made me pliable now hardened into resolve. That night, I began writing. I documented everything: dates, conversations, exact phrases, who said what and when. I wrote about my daily activities, my ability to manage my own care, the clarity of my thoughts. I didn't know yet what I would do with these notes. I only knew I needed a record that existed outside my own memory, because memory could be questioned. Maya noticed the notebook the next evening. "What are you working on?" she asked. "Proof," I said simply. She studied my face for a long moment, then said, "You know, you can request an independent evaluation." "I tried." She hesitated, lowered her voice. "Not here. From outside." That was the first crack in the wall. Over the following days, Maya slipped me information quietly. Elder rights resources, numbers scribbled on scraps of paper. She never told me what to do. She just made sure I knew options existed. That distinction mattered. She wasn't rescuing me. She was restoring my agency. Emotionally, I was unraveling and rebuilding at the same time. Some nights, grief still pinned me to the mattress. Memories of Frank flooding in with a sharpness that took my breath away. Other nights, anger kept me awake, replaying Elaine's tone, Tom's silence, the way they'd moved on without me. But beneath it all, something steadier was forming. I was still here, still thinking, still capable. And for the first time since Frank died, I wasn't waiting for someone else to decide what happened next. I was deciding. The emotional unraveling didn't end with clarity. It ended with a choice. I would not disappear quietly. Once I decided I would not disappear quietly, the world around me seemed to push back harder, as if it sensed resistance and responded with pressure. That's how escalation works in situations like this. Control doesn't loosen its grip gracefully, it tightens first. The very next morning after I began documenting everything, Elaine showed up unannounced. She stood in my doorway with her arms crossed, eyes scanning the room the way people do when they're evaluating property, not checking on a parent. Her smile was thin, practiced, already annoyed. "Maya tells me you've been asking a lot of questions," she said. I didn't bother asking how she knew. Information traveled fast when it benefited her. "I'm asking for my records," I replied. "That's not unreasonable." Elaine laughed, short and sharp. "Mom, you're in assisted living. You don't need records." "I need them because they're mine." She stepped inside and closed the door behind her without asking. That small action, closing the door, felt deliberate, controlling the space, controlling the conversation. "You're making this difficult," she said. "The administrator called me. They're concerned." "Concerned about what?" "That you're agitated, that you're fixated on money, that you're not adjusting well." I felt a familiar heat rise in my chest. Grief isn't agitation, and asking where my money is doesn't make me unfit. Elaine's expression hardened. "You don't get to decide that anymore." There it was again. That phrase, anymore. I realized then that escalation wasn't just happening around me. It was happening inside my children. The more I asserted myself, the more they needed me to be incapable. Their story depended on it. Tom arrived a few minutes later, slipping into the room like backup. He didn't look at me when he spoke. He talked to Elaine instead, as if I were a piece of furniture. "We need to move faster," he said. "The house offer won't wait." My heart pounded. What house offer? Elaine shot him a warning look, but the damage was done. "What offer?" I repeated. Tom sighed, irritated. "See? This is exactly what I mean. You're not following the conversation." "I'm following it perfectly," I said. "You're selling my house." Elaine stepped between us. "We're restructuring assets to make sure your care is covered long term." "My care is covered," I said. "I have savings. I have insurance. I don't need to sell my home." Elaine leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You don't get to weigh in on this anymore, Mom. That's what power of attorney means." I stared at her. "I never signed it." She didn't blink. "You agreed to it." "No," I said. "I didn't." The silence that followed was electric. Tom shifted uncomfortably. Elaine's jaw tightened. This was the first time I'd directly challenged the legality of what they were doing. "You were emotional," Elaine said finally. "You said you trusted us." "Trust is not consent." Her face flushed. "Do you want to make this ugly?" "It already is," I replied. After they left, the administrator came by to check on me. She asked questions that weren't really questions. How was I sleeping? Was I feeling anxious? Did I feel overwhelmed? Each answer I gave was noted carefully, not for understanding, but for classification. I could see it happening in real time. My resistance was being reframed as instability. That's when I understood the real danger. The system didn't need proof I was incompetent. It only needed my children to insist I was, and for me to appear emotional while doing it. That night, I barely slept. The hallway lights glowed faintly under my door, and the sounds of the building, carts rolling, a resident crying out, a television murmuring somewhere, pressed in on me. I thought about Frank, about how he'd always handled paperwork, negotiations, the practical side of life, how exposed I felt now without him, and how angry he would have been if he'd seen what was happening. The next day, Maya found me sitting upright in bed, notebook open, pen moving steadily. "You okay?" she asked softly. "I'm racing time," I said. She glanced at the notebook, then at the door, and lowered her voice. "Your daughter requested a competency review?" My stomach dropped. "When?" "This morning." That was escalation. A competency review meant a doctor, one affiliated with the facility, would assess whether I was capable of making my own decisions. On paper, it sounded neutral. In reality, it was stacked against me. A bad day, a poorly worded answer, tears at the wrong moment. Any of it could be used to justify permanent control. "They're trying to lock this in," I said. Maya nodded. "That's what it looks like." I asked her if she thought I was competent. She didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Then I need someone else to say it, officially." She handed me a folded piece of paper, a name, an address, an elder rights attorney who'd helped her grandmother years earlier. "I can't do more than this," she said. "But I didn't see anything, okay?" I understood exactly what she meant. That afternoon, while Elaine and Tom assumed everything was moving smoothly in their favor, I made the most important call of my life. My voice shook at first as I explained my situation to the receptionist. But by the time the attorney himself came on the line, my voice had steadied. "I am being held in assisted living against my will," I said. "My children have taken control of my finances without my consent, and I am mentally competent." There was a pause. Then, "Mrs. Miller, can you tell me where you are right now?" "Yes." "Good," he said. "Then listen carefully. What they're doing may be legal adjacent, but it's not legal, and you're not out of options." The escalation accelerated after that. Elaine's tone changed when she realized I'd spoken to a lawyer. It sharpened, threatened. She accused me of betrayal, of wasting money, of humiliating the family. Tom stopped pretending entirely. He told me flat out that if I fought them, they would make sure I stayed right where I was. They underestimated something critical. I was no longer grieving passively. I was focused. The attorney arranged for an independent cognitive evaluation. Not through the facility, through a private physician. Elaine tried to block it. The attorney overruled her. The evaluation was scheduled. The day it happened, Elaine sat in the corner of the room, arms crossed, lips pressed tight. The doctor asked me questions calmly. Date, location, current events, financial hypotheticals, medical decisions. I answered without hesitation, without confusion, without apology. When it was over, the doctor looked at Elaine and said, "Your mother is fully competent." Elaine's face drained of color. That wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the collapse. Because once my competence was documented, every action my children had taken became questionable. And once something becomes questionable, it becomes dangerous for the people who assumed no one was watching. The escalation had reached its peak, and now the pressure was about to reverse. The confrontation didn't happen all at once. It unfolded the way real reckonings do, slowly, publicly, and with witnesses who couldn't pretend not to see it. The independent evaluation changed everything, even before anyone said it out loud. The administrator's tone shifted when she spoke to me afterward. Not warm exactly, but cautious, careful. The kind of careful reserved for situations where blame might be reassigned soon. I noticed it immediately. After weeks of being talked about, people were suddenly talking to me again. Elaine noticed it too. She arrived the next morning with a different energy, too bright, too cheerful, the way people act when they're scrambling to regain control without admitting they've lost it. She brought pastries from a bakery she knew I liked, a gesture so transparent it almost made me laugh. "Mom," she said, placing the box on the table, "we've all been under a lot of stress." I didn't touch the pastries. She sat across from me, smoothing her skirt, glancing briefly at the door as if checking who might be listening. "We may have moved a little too fast," she admitted, "but you have to understand. We were scared." "Scared of what?" I asked. She hesitated. "Of losing you." The lie hung in the air, delicate and fragile. I let it sit there for a moment before responding. "You weren't scared of losing me," I said calmly. "You were scared of losing the house." Her smile faltered. "That's not fair." "Neither is selling my belongings while I was locked in here," I replied. That was the first time she actually flinched. Tom joined us midway through the conversation, summoned by Elaine's text. He didn't bother with pastries or pleasantries. He stood, hands in pockets, jaw set. "Let's just be practical," he said. "This doesn't need to turn into a whole thing." "A whole thing," I repeated. "You put me in a nursing home against my will." "Temporary," Elaine snapped. "It was always temporary." "Then why did you apply for permanent guardianship?" Silence. I slid my notebook across the table. Dates, copies of emails, notes from the attorney, the independent evaluation summary. I watched their faces as they scanned the pages. Tom's eyes widened slightly. Elaine's lips parted, then pressed together. "You've been planning this," Elaine said. "No," I replied. "I've been responding." The administrator knocked lightly and entered, followed by the attorney I'd retained. He was calm, composed, and devastatingly prepared. He introduced himself, then addressed Elaine and Tom directly. "Your mother has retained me to represent her interests," he said. "Effective immediately, all financial actions taken without her explicit consent are under review." Elaine stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. We were acting in good faith." The attorney didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Good faith doesn't include liquidating assets before legal authority is granted." Tom bristled. "You're making us sound like criminals." "If the shoe fits," the attorney replied mildly. That's when Elaine lost her composure completely. "You don't know what it's like dealing with her," she said, her voice sharp, loud enough now that anyone passing the door could hear. "She's been impossible since Dad died. Depressed, irrational. She wouldn't even get out of bed some days." I looked at her steadily. "I was grieving." "You were wallowing," she shot back. "And we didn't have the luxury of waiting." "Waiting for what?" I asked. "My death?" The room went quiet. Tom looked away. Elaine didn't. "Don't be dramatic." "I'm not," I said. "I'm being precise." The attorney cleared his throat. "Mrs. Miller's grief does not constitute incapacity, and attempting to use it as justification for financial control is ill-advised." Elaine laughed bitterly. "So what? Now we're the villains?" "You decided that when you ignored my wishes," I said. The confrontation escalated quickly after that. Voices rose, accusations flew. Elaine accused me of being ungrateful. Tom accused me of ruining the family. I listened without interrupting, noticing something important. Neither of them denied the core facts. They didn't deny selling my belongings. They didn't deny discussing the house without me. They didn't deny moving to consolidate control while I was vulnerable, because they couldn't. Finally, the administrator stepped in. "I think we should pause this discussion," she said, her professional smile strained. "This is becoming disruptive." The attorney nodded. "Agreed. And for the record, my client will be leaving this facility." Elaine spun toward him. "You can't just take her out." "She can," he said. "She's competent." That word again, competent. This time, it landed like a verdict. Elaine's face crumpled, not with remorse, but with fury. "You think this ends well for you?" she hissed at me. "You're going to be alone." I met her gaze. I already was. Tom muttered something under his breath and stormed out. Elaine followed, heels clicking sharply down the hall. No goodbye, no glance back. After they left, the room felt strangely still. The administrator apologized in vague terms. The attorney began outlining next steps. I barely heard him. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the release of pressure I'd been under for weeks. That night, I slept deeply for the first time since Frank died. But the confrontation wasn't over. 2 days later, I received notice that my children were contesting my decision to revoke their access to my finances. They claimed undue influence from the attorney, from the facility staff, from outside parties. They were doubling down, which told me everything I needed to know. They weren't sorry. They were desperate, and desperation makes people reckless. I wish I could say I was surprised by what my children did next. But the truth is, once people reveal who they are under pressure, the rest is pattern, not shock. Elaine and Tom didn't suddenly grow consciences. They escalated in the only way left to them, by trying to turn my independence into evidence of instability. The first sign came as a phone call from the facility's billing office. Polite voice, neutral tone, a question framed as concern. "Mrs. Miller, we're having trouble processing payment for your stay. Your account access appears to have been changed." Changed, such a gentle word for theft. I already knew what that meant. Elaine had frozen my accounts. The attorney confirmed it an hour later. They attempted to move funds yesterday afternoon. When they couldn't, they blocked access entirely. We'll file an emergency motion. Emergency. That word again. Funny how it only ever applied to me when they needed leverage. But this time, something different happened. Something they didn't anticipate. Because freezing my accounts didn't make me panic. It made the paper trail obvious. Within 48 hours, subpoenas were issued for financial records, bank statements, emails, internal messages between my children discussing timing, liquidation, and getting Mom settled before she complicates things. Language they'd assumed no one would ever read aloud. Elaine's tone changed when she realized that everything they'd done in haste, every shortcut, every assumption, was now documented. She called me late one evening, voice trembling with forced calm. "Mom, we can still fix this." "There's nothing to fix," I said. "There is," she insisted. "If you just cooperate." That word, cooperate, as if compliance was reconciliation. "You tried to take my life apart piece by piece while I was grieving," I said. "That's not something you smooth over." Tom took a different approach. He showed up unannounced at the attorney's office the next day, loud, indignant, accusing everyone involved of manipulating me. He said I was being coached, that I was not acting like myself. I was acting exactly like myself. They just hadn't paid attention before. The turning point didn't come with a dramatic speech or a sudden revelation. It came with paperwork. A judge reviewed the independent evaluation, the financial records, the timeline of my forced placement, and issued a temporary injunction. Elaine and Tom were barred from making any financial or medical decisions on my behalf. My accounts were restored. The sale of my house was halted. Items already sold had to be accounted for. And suddenly, the power shifted. The facility administrator called me into her office, apologetic now, in a way that felt genuine. "We should have asked more questions," she said. "Yes," I replied. "You should have." Arrangements were made for my release. Not discharge. Release. That distinction mattered more than I expected. Discharge implies illness. Release implies confinement. The day I left, Maya helped me pack. She hugged me carefully, like someone who understood the weight of the moment. "You did this," she said quietly. "No," I replied. I remembered who I was. Going home was harder than I'd imagined. The house felt altered, even though it was still standing. Furniture missing, drawers disturbed. The absence of familiar things was louder than clutter ever had been. Elaine had stripped pieces of my life away, assuming I wouldn't notice, or wouldn't matter. But I noticed, and it mattered. The attorney walked me through next steps: civil action, asset recovery, protection orders if necessary. I listened, nodded, asked questions. I was no longer overwhelmed. I was engaged. Elaine sent emails apologizing in language that never quite acknowledged harm. Tom stopped communicating altogether. Their silence was strategic now, not dismissive. They were consulting their own lawyers. That's how I knew the turning point was real. Because when people who once dismissed you start lawyering up, they've recognized something dangerous. You're no longer powerless. One afternoon, as I sat at my kitchen table, sorting through recovered documents, I came across an email Elaine had sent Tom weeks before I was moved. "If we don't act now, she'll change her will." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Not concern, not fear, strategy. That was the moment the last thread of doubt snapped. This wasn't misguided love. This was premeditated. I forwarded the email to my attorney without comment. 2 days later, Elaine's lawyer called requesting mediation. I declined. The turning point wasn't just legal, it was internal. For the first time, I stopped asking myself why my children had done this and started asking a better question. What kind of life did I want now that I was free? And that question scared them more than any lawsuit ever could. Consequences don't always arrive with sirens or courtrooms. Sometimes they come quietly, in the form of doors closing that never reopen. That's what happened to Elaine and Tom. Not all at once, not dramatically, but completely. Once I declined mediation, the dynamic shifted again. Up until that point, my children still believed there was a version of this story where they could salvage something: money, reputation, control. Mediation would have allowed them to reframe what they'd done as a misunderstanding, a family disagreement, a moment of panic during grief. I refused to give them that comfort, because this wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a choice. The civil case moved forward without theatrics, no jury, no emotional testimony, just documents, timelines, and facts that did not bend to intention or excuse. The judge didn't ask whether Elaine and Tom loved me. That question didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was whether their actions respected my rights. They hadn't. The ruling was methodical and devastating in its simplicity. All assets removed without my consent were to be returned or compensated at full value. Legal fees were assigned to them. A permanent order was placed restricting their authority over my finances and medical decisions. The court did not accuse them of malice. It didn't need to. Negligence paired with self-interest was enough. When the ruling came through, Elaine sent a final message. "I hope you're happy." I stared at it for a long time before deleting it without response. Happiness had nothing to do with this. Dignity did. Tom never contacted me again. Through my attorney, I learned that his debts were worse than he'd admitted. Credit cards, loans, a business investment gone bad. My house hadn't been a safety plan. It had been a bailout. Elaine's situation unraveled more slowly. She'd built her identity around competence, control, appearing responsible. This exposure didn't just cost her money. It cost her credibility. Family members who'd taken her side quietly stopped calling. Friends who'd praised her for stepping up grew distant when the truth became inconvenient. People don't like discovering they applauded the wrong story. As for me, the resolution wasn't about victory. It was about restoration. I spent weeks reclaiming my home, replacing what was gone, reorganizing what had been disturbed. Each small act, choosing a lamp, rehanging a picture, restocking a kitchen drawer, felt like stitching myself back together. I wasn't trying to recreate the past. I was establishing a future that belonged to me alone. Grief didn't vanish. Frank was still gone. Some mornings I still reached for habits we'd built together. 2 mugs instead of 1. The radio station he liked better than mine. But grief no longer defined my competence. It no longer justified other people deciding my fate. That distinction changed everything. The facility sent a formal apology letter, carefully worded, legally cautious. I accepted it without ceremony. Maya sent a card to my house a month later. Inside, she'd written, "You reminded me why I chose this job." I keep that card in my nightstand drawer. Friends began visiting again. Real visits, not the kind where people whisper or watch you closely for signs of decline. They brought casseroles I didn't need, and gossip I'd missed, and laughter that felt rusty at first, then familiar. Some of them admitted they'd wondered whether Elaine was right, whether I was okay. "I should have asked you," one said quietly. "Yes," I replied. "You should have." That became my quiet refrain. I updated my will, not out of spite, out of clarity. I made choices that reflected the life I'd lived and the boundaries I'd learned too late, but would not abandon again. I set up provisions for myself first: security, autonomy, comfort. Elaine and Tom were not included. That decision wasn't emotional. It was logistical. People mistake forgiveness for access. I didn't. The final resolution came not from the courts, but from an ordinary afternoon 6 months later. I was standing in my kitchen, sunlight warming the counter, when the phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Elaine's voice filled the room. "I've been in therapy," she said. "They say I need to take responsibility. I know what I did was wrong. I was scared. I didn't think you'd fight back. I thought I was helping." I listened without interruption. "I don't expect forgiveness," she continued, though her tone suggested she did. "But I hope someday we can move past this." I deleted the message, not out of anger, out of resolution. Because moving past something doesn't always mean bringing it with you. I am 73 now. I live alone, on purpose. My days are quiet in ways that feel chosen, not imposed. I grieve when I need to. I rest when I want to. I speak to people who listen, not manage. I make plans without asking permission. Sometimes I think about how close I came to disappearing without a fight, how easily grief could have been used to erase me, and how often that must still be happening to people who don't realize what's being taken until it's nearly gone. The resolution of this story isn't that my children were punished, it's that I was restored and they were revealed. Freedom doesn't arrive with fireworks. It settles in quietly, almost shyly, after the noise is gone. That's what the aftermath of everything felt like for me. Not triumphant, not dramatic, but deeply, unmistakably mine. When people hear what happened, they expect bitterness. They expect me to sound hardened or vengeful. I'm neither. What I feel now is clarity, and clarity, I've learned, is far more powerful than anger ever was. The first real sign that I had reclaimed my life came one ordinary morning. I woke up without an alarm. Sunlight spilled across my bedroom floor the same way it had for decades, but this time it didn't feel borrowed or temporary. I made coffee the way I like it, strong, black, no compromise, and stood at the kitchen window watching a neighbor walk her dog. No one was monitoring me. No one was evaluating whether I seemed with it. No one had authority over my day but me. For years, I'd confused peace with quiet compliance. I thought keeping things smooth was the same as keeping things right. It took being nearly erased to understand the difference. Life after the conflict wasn't about rebuilding relationships. It was about rebuilding trust with myself. I had to forgive my own hesitation, my instinct to doubt my perceptions just because someone louder insisted I was wrong. That kind of self-forgiveness doesn't come quickly. It comes in small moments, choosing what to eat without asking, spending money without guilt, saying no without explanation. I reorganized my house slowly, intentionally, not to restore it to how it was before, but to reflect who I am now. I donated things I'd been holding on to out of habit rather than love. I moved furniture simply because I could. I planted herbs in the backyard and laughed when half of them died because I forgot to water them. That, too, was freedom, failure without consequence. People began asking me for advice, quietly, at first. Friends of friends. A woman from church whose son had started helping with her bills. A neighbor whose daughter was pressuring her to downsize before she was ready. They didn't ask dramatic questions. They asked simple ones. How did you know? What should I watch for? What do I do if it's already started? I told them the truth. Watch how people talk about you when you're not in the room. Pay attention to urgency. Real care is patient. And if someone tells you you're incapable, ask who benefits from that story. I don't hate my children. That surprises people. Hate would require ongoing emotional investment, and I no longer give that freely. What I feel is distance. Healthy, necessary distance. The kind that keeps me intact. Elaine tried again, months later, this time through a handwritten letter. It was softer than the voicemail, less defensive. She wrote about reflection, about growth, about how losing control had forced her to look at herself. She asked if we could start fresh. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. Not everything that's acknowledged needs to be reopened. My relationship with Tom remains non-existent. I don't know where he lives now. I don't check. Knowing used to feel like responsibility. Now it feels optional. That's another lesson aging teaches you, if you let it. Obligation is not the same as love. At 73, my life is smaller in some ways and larger in others. My social circle is tighter. My tolerance for nonsense is nearly gone. But my inner life, my sense of self, has expanded in ways I didn't think possible after loss. Frank's absence still aches. That hasn't changed. Grief doesn't resolve the way legal disputes do. It lingers. It reshapes you. But it no longer makes me question my worth or my competence. If anything, surviving both grief and betrayal has made me fiercely protective of the life I have left. I sleep better now, not because everything is perfect, but because nothing is being decided for me behind closed doors. Sometimes, late in the afternoon, I sit on the porch and watch the light change. I think about how easily this could have gone another way. How close I came to becoming one of those women people talk about in hushed tones, placed somewhere, taken care of, no longer herself. The line between autonomy and erasure is thinner than most people realize. That's why I tell this story, not for sympathy, not for validation, but as a warning and an encouragement. If you're grieving, it doesn't mean you're dying. If you're tired, it doesn't mean you're finished. And if someone tells you your time has passed, ask yourself who benefits from you believing that. I didn't get my life back because I was strong every moment. I got it back because I refused to disappear quietly. They mistook my grief for weakness. That was their mistake. I didn't get angry. I got my life back. Now, when people ask how I'm doing, I answer honestly. I'm well, I say, and I'm free. And that's more than enough. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to Echo Lens Stories and share your experience in the comments. Your voice matters, and you are not alone.